The maintenance bay of the Artemis Vanguard smelled like scorched metal and old coffee, a combination that somehow still felt comforting to Kieran as he tightened a stabilizer bolt on a humdrum energy conduit. Sparks hissed from the corner where a malfunctioning hollow panel blinked in protest, and he muttered something about how, even in zero gravity, machines had attitudes worse than the crew. He paused, catching the faint hum of the ship's engines through the floor panels, the kind of low-frequency vibration that made him feel as if the vessel itself were breathing. Normally, this would have been a perfect morning, if mornings on a starship could ever be called that, but he sensed a shift in the air long before anyone announced it. That shift came in the form of boots clanging against the metal walkway outside the bay, each step deliberate, commanding, and accompanied by a faint whirring of a hovering maintenance drone reluctantly backing away. Then she appeared. Lysera, the alien woman whose reputation preceded her in both whispers and panicked glances, stormed into the bay. Her armor gleamed under the harsh lights, even battered, and the long ears that framed her face twitched in perfect synchrony with her anger. Kieran, who had a habit of underestimating appearances, froze just long enough to appreciate the subtle iridescence that shifted across her plating like liquid metal. Sparks from the conduit reflected in her eyes, or perhaps it was her glare that made the sparks appear. Who repaired this armor? Her voice carried across the bay, not loud in the way humans shouted, but heavy, exact, and imbued with the kind of authority that made most engineers spill their coffee in shock. The usual suspects shuffled, whispering blame like frightened rodents. Kieran's mouth opened to explain nothing in particular, only to realize the panic in the room had reached an almost cartoonish level. Well, you see," he began, his voice betraying more nerves than a hyperactive plasma core. "It was me. I might have touched a few circuits, maybe polished a few panels. Definitely not welded a support beam with my lunch spatula, I swear." Lysera's ears flicked, her eyes narrowing as if she were weighing whether he was the boldest fool she had ever seen or the dumbest. Then she did something unexpected. She let a sound escape, a low vibration that could have been a laugh or a growl disguised as one. "A spatula," she said, her voice carrying a hint of sarcasm that only slightly softened the intimidation. "Explain how a human thought a spatula could substitute for reinforced nanoalloy stabilizers." Kieran shifted his weight awkwardly, fumbling with the wrench in his hands like it might explain itself. "Well," he said, "in my defense, it was either the spatula or the emergency ketchup packet, and structural integrity first." A ripple of chuckles spread through the other engineers, though they quickly fell silent when Lysera's ears twitched again. She leaned closer, and for a terrifying moment, Kieran imagined she might actually bite his head off. Instead, she tilted her head, one brow raised as if challenging him to continue. "That's the most human excuse I've ever heard," she said. Then, to his surprise, she gestured toward the armor. "Show me." Hands trembling just slightly, Kieran approached, half expecting the armor to start yelling at him for daring to touch it. He traced the pathways he had soldered, explaining each adjustment, each micro-calibration. "See, the circuits were misaligned with the energy matrix. The stabilizer would have overloaded if I hadn't rerouted the flux lines. Oh, and I may have added a minor anti-scratch coating, purely cosmetic, strictly non-essential." He winced at the last part, hoping she wouldn't notice the gloss he'd applied. Lysera crouched, examining the inner panels, her fingers, human-like but longer and tipped with faintly translucent nails, hovering over his work without touching. "Curious," she said softly. "Humans and their need to beautify functionality." Her ears twitched again, a motion Kieran guessed was some kind of alien approval or amusement. "You are either very lucky or very foolish. Which is it?" "I prefer to call it aggressive optimism," he said. She blinked once, her gaze sharpening, and for a moment he thought he might have offended her. Then she straightened, and with a flourish that made his stomach lurch, she stepped back and snapped her gauntleted fingers. A drone hovered to her side, scanning the armor and giving a quick analysis. Impressive, it announced in its monotone mechanical voice, confirming what Kieran had feared. She was going to like him now. Well, I'll take impressive, Kieran said, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead, even if it comes with long ears twitching judgmentally. Lysera's lips curved, subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if a smirk were born in slow motion. You have ingenuity, she said, her voice softer now, almost approving. Perhaps you are not completely useless in a crisis. Kieran laughed nervously. I'll mark that down as a personal victory, he said, crouching beside a tangle of wires. Next time, I promise to only use actual tools. She tilted her head, studying him with that piercing gaze, then tapped the armor with a gauntlet. Sparks flared, not from damage but as a diagnostic check, and the plating hummed in perfect resonance. You will remain here, she said, if only to keep my armor from attempting another culinary experiment. He nodded vigorously, secretly pleased that she didn't order him out, or worse, vaporize him with a glance. It's an honor, really, he said, trying not to sound like he was just relieved to survive. And I promise no more lunch utensils. For a few minutes, they worked in companionable silence, punctuated by the occasional quip or sarcastic comment. Lysera would flick her ears in mock annoyance when he made a joke about armor polishing, and Kieran responded with increasingly absurd explanations, like how adding starlight dust could improve energy conductivity, though he admitted that last part might be purely theoretical. The tension of the first meeting had dissolved into something lighter, playful even, as they discovered that, while one of them wielded authority and power, the other could wield creativity and wit, a combination neither expected to be useful in a starship maintenance bay. By the time the first set of repairs was complete, the armor gleamed not just in function but in subtle artistry, each panel aligned with precision and just enough human whimsy to make it his signature. Lysera stepped back, scanning it from head to toe, and finally, after what felt like hours, she nodded. Not bad, human, not bad at all. Kieran's ears, or rather his face, lit up with relief. Thanks, he said, feeling like he had just survived an interstellar ordeal without incineration. So, does this mean I get to stay on the ship, or? Her ears twitched again, a small signal of amusement, or perhaps resignation. Stay, if only to keep my armor in one piece and your imagination out of trouble. Kieran grinned. He knew this was the beginning of something unusual, a partnership that might just redefine what humans and aliens could accomplish together. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he realized he was looking forward to the chaos, the laughter, and the occasional sparks, literal and metaphorical, that Lysera's presence would bring. Kieran had learned quickly that working with Lysera required equal parts attention, creativity, and a tolerance for unexpected chaos. The morning began with a routine inspection, or as routine as any inspection could be when an alien with long, twitching ears wielded authority over everything from plasma conduits to snack vending drones. He floated along the maintenance bay, tool belt slung awkwardly in zero gravity, while Lysera's armor clinked with every step, the metal plating reflecting the harsh glow of the overhead lights. Did you calibrate the flux stabilizers on the left forearm? Lysera asked, her voice carrying the kind of clipped precision that made even the ship's AI pause for a moment, unsure if it had been addressed correctly. I did, yes, Kieran said, grinning. Although if they start glowing pink, it's probably just an artistic choice. I like to keep things lively. Her ears twitched sharply, a motion he was beginning to interpret as skepticism tinged with amusement. Lively? You are aware this is armor, not decoration for a zero-gravity dance hall, are you not? Dance hall, he said. Oh, absolutely. I've been meaning to install a disco mode. Nothing says efficiency like glittering nanolights while dodging plasma arcs. Lysera's lips curved into something faintly resembling a smile, and Kieran decided that this was an acceptable measure of success. He turned to adjust a panel on her gauntlet and sparks flew, but only because he had miscalculated the trajectory of a tiny graviton bolt. Minor miscalculation, he said, waving his hand. Totally intentional demonstration of safety protocols. The day unfolded like a carefully engineered accident. Lysera put him through a series of tests that combined technical skill and physical dexterity, often in ways that seemed designed to provoke both panic and laughter. One drill involved navigating the armor through a simulated meteor field while he floated alongside, tethered by magnetic boots that occasionally refused to unstick. Kieran nearly collided with a spinning asteroid projection, only to be saved by Lysera's quick reflexes and a well-timed quip about human coordination being mildly amusing at best. When he recovered, he tried to retort with a joke about the asteroid's poor aim, but she shook her head and flicked her ears. "Humans are optimistic in their foolishness," she said, "a quality I may come to admire or regret." "You might regret it," Kieran replied with mock solemnity. "I tend to leave a trail of accidental brilliance." The armor had secrets, as he discovered while adjusting the cooling modules on her back. Hidden compartments housed microdrones, nanobot reservoirs, and tiny energy reserves that hummed quietly, almost like the ship itself had a heartbeat. Kieran found himself marveling at the ingenuity, and for a moment he wondered if Lysera ever slept, or if her armor had become a second, slightly sarcastic, life form. He carefully manipulated a microdrone that had gotten stuck in a maintenance duct, and as he did, he realized he was enjoying the work more than he had anticipated. The humor, the chaos, the constant banter, it all made the tension bearable. "Be careful with that drone," Lysera warned, her voice calm but firm. "It is programmed to recognize you as an intruder if mishandled." Kieran glanced at it floating precariously in the conduit and said, "Relax, I have a way with machines, most of the time." He extended a gloved hand and the drone buzzed around it, eventually obeying, much to his silent pride. "See, charm works on everything, well, almost everything." Lysera tilted her head, observing him with the same analytical gaze she had employed when he first repaired her armor. "You amuse me, human," she said. "I am not sure if this is intentional or a byproduct of your species' foolishness." "I'll take it as a compliment," Kieran said, grinning. "Intentional, of course." By midday, they were interrupted by a series of alarms. The ship's AI announced a rogue drone swarm detected in the outer sector. Lysera's ears flicked, and she moved with a fluid grace, the armor amplifying her strength and speed. "This is not a drill," she said. "Prepare for engagement." Kieran floated alongside her, toolkit in hand, improvising. He rigged an energy net from spare flux cables and a repurposed graviton emitter, muttering jokes under his breath about turning space drones into glittery confetti. Lysera, as always, offered commentary, dry but sharp. "I did not expect human ingenuity to involve glitter. This may yet save us or condemn us entirely." The rogue drones approached in a chaotic formation, their sensors lighting up as they detected the ship's energy signature. Lysera moved like a storm through the bay, deflecting attacks with her gauntlets while Kieran adjusted the improvised net, laughing at the absurdity of the situation. One drone veered wildly and collided with a spare repair pod, causing it to spin helplessly like a pinwheel in zero gravity. "Looks like someone needs more practice in aerial maneuvers," Kieran shouted. Lysera's ears flicked sharply, and she executed a perfectly timed counterattack, disabling 3 drones with minimal effort. "Your levity is noted, human. Do not let it slow you in actual danger," she said, though the faint twitch of her lips suggested amusement. The battle unfolded as a chaotic ballet, punctuated by sparks, levitating tools, and Kieran's running commentary on drone behavior. When the final drone was captured in the energy net, the two of them floated in exhausted silence for a moment, catching their breath. Kieran's gloves were singed, and his hair stood on end from static discharge, but the armor was intact, and Lysera seemed less severe if only slightly. "You performed well," she said finally, her voice calm, almost approving. Your creativity and humor may be of use in the future. Humor is essential survival equipment, Kieran replied, floating past her and tapping a panel for calibration, especially when your ears are long enough to catch sarcasm from across the room. Lysera's ears twitched sharply at that, and Kieran swore he saw the faintest smirk on her face. He had survived drills, chaos, and rogue drones, and he had managed to amuse one of the most demanding beings in the galaxy. For a human engineer, it was a victory of skill, courage, and the subtle power of laughter in zero gravity. By evening, as the ship hummed quietly and the emergency lights faded, Kieran and Lysera worked side by side, adjusting minor armor calibrations and joking about the absurdity of interstellar bureaucracy. Somewhere between sarcasm, sparks, and improvised engineering, a partnership had formed, one that neither human nor alien could have anticipated, forged in humor, danger, and the quiet satisfaction of work done well. The stars outside the viewport shimmered like distant promises, and Kieran felt certain that this was only the beginning of a very strange and very remarkable adventure. The alert klaxons blared across the Artemis Vanguard, bouncing off metal walls and sending a flurry of floating tools into chaotic spirals. Kieran had just finished calibrating a secondary energy conduit when the ship's AI barked. Rogue drone swarm detected. Sector 7 engagement imminent. He groaned, brushing sparks off his gloves and muttering, "And here I thought lunch would be the most dangerous thing today." Lysera appeared at his side in a blur of metallic grace, her armor humming in resonance with the ship's emergency systems. Her long ears twitched sharply as she assessed the approaching threat. "Prepare yourself, human. Do not let your humor interfere with tactical efficiency." Kieran grinned, floating alongside her, toolkit and improvised gadgets at the ready. "No promises, but I'll try to keep the jokes under lethal levels." The rogue drones descended like a swarm of metallic hornets, their sensors glowing crimson as they scanned for energy signatures. Kieran quickly rigged a series of graviton nets using spare flux cables, muttering under his breath about turning hostile drones into space confetti. Lysera rolled her eyes, or at least, the closest approximation of an eye roll her alien anatomy allowed, but there was a flicker of amusement in her gaze. The first wave of drones collided with the nets, sparks flying as the energy matrix overloaded slightly from Kieran's creative adjustments. One drone, spinning wildly, slammed into a supply crate, sending a graviton-packed toolkit floating in every direction. Kieran caught one wrench midair and tossed it like a frisbee at another drone, cracking. "Catch, you overgrown tin can." Lysera moved through the chaos like a storm, her armor plating deflecting blasts with precision. She disarmed drones with sweeping motions of her gauntlets, each strike punctuated by a sarcastic quip. "Are humans always this reckless, or is this your signature style?" "Depends on the audience," Kieran replied, spinning a small drone around with a magnetic pulse before it collided with another, triggering a harmless mini-explosion. "I like to entertain." Amid the chaos, Kieran realized the drones were coordinating, their AI sophisticated enough to adapt to predictable patterns. "We need improvisation," he shouted, reading the holographic schematic of the swarm. He began rerouting power from auxiliary reactors to the graviton nets, muttering jokes about how the ship might explode, in a festive way, if they miscalculated. Lysera arched an eyebrow but didn't interfere. Instead, she moved with him, covering angles he hadn't even thought to consider. Minutes stretched, tension and humor interweaving as drone after drone fell into their improvised traps. Sparks, levitating tools, and plasma arcs created a chaotic dance of destruction. Kieran noticed the first sign of fatigue in Lysera. Her ears twitched slower, her movements still precise but tinged with exhaustion. He called out, "Careful, even legends need coffee." She flicked a gauntlet at a charging drone, disabling it, and quipped, "I do not drink caffeine, it is inefficient." Finally, only a few drones remained, and Kieran had rigged an experimental micrograviton pulse designed to capture them all. "This is it," he said, toggling the switch. The pulse rippled outward, lifting the remaining drones and collapsing them neatly into a containment matrix. He floated back, wiping sweat, or whatever passed for sweat in zero gravity, from his brow. "And that, madam, is how humans do controlled chaos." Lysera regarded him silently for a moment, her ears flicking. A gesture that Kieran had learned meant some combination of approval and mild disbelief. Then, with a deliberate motion, she unclipped a panel from her armor and handed it to him. "You have earned my respect, human, not merely for skill but for your adaptability, and your humor, if I must admit it." Kieran's grin widened. "I'll treasure that, or at least tell my great-grandchildren about it, if the ship survives, of course." The battle won, the rogue drones deactivated. Kieran and Lysera drifted through the maintenance bay together. The tension of the past days, the tests, the improvisations, the close calls, had transformed something fundamental. Kieran realized he was no longer the cautious, hesitant engineer who had first stepped forward. He had grown into a partner capable of quick thinking, courage under pressure, and even charm when needed. Lysera, for her part, seemed less like the stern, untouchable figure he had first encountered. The faint smirk she now allowed herself, the subtle teasing about his creative engineering methods, suggested she had recognized his humanity, and perhaps even something more. Their banter flowed freely now, punctuated by the occasional sparks of machinery or the accidental levitation of a toolbox, both of them laughing despite the surrounding chaos. Later, as the ship returned to its hum of normal activity, Kieran found himself tinkering with minor adjustments to the armor, Lysera observing silently, occasionally offering dry commentary. "Do not make it glittery," she said at one point, to which Kieran replied, "Glitter improves morale, you should try it." She flicked her ears at the joke, and for once he took it as a compliment. In the calm that followed, Kieran reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The tension of first impressions, the humor that diffused danger, and the collaboration that had tested both their skills and their patience. He realized he had learned more than technical engineering. He had learned to trust, to improvise, and to face challenges with a combination of ingenuity and levity. And Lysera, despite her imposing presence, had learned that even humans, seemingly fragile and unpredictable, could rise to the occasion with skill and courage. The ship glided past distant stars, silent witnesses to the partnership that had been forged. Kieran floated alongside Lysera, floating tools forgotten for a moment, the chaos of the day replaced with a quiet sense of accomplishment. He knew that the galaxy was vast, filled with dangers and unknowns, but for the first time he felt prepared, not just because of his engineering skills, but because he had learned how to navigate both peril and humor with someone equally formidable at his side. Lysera's ears twitched, catching his gaze. "Human," she said softly, almost conversationally, "do not make this the end of your entertainment." "I wouldn't dream of it," Kieran replied. "Besides, we've still got armor to polish, drones to confuse, and maybe a disco mode to activate." For the first time in days, they laughed together, a rare sound on the starship, echoing faintly in the corridors. The adventure had changed them both, Kieran into a confident, clever engineer capable of daring solutions, and Lysera into a being willing to trust, even enjoy, the unpredictable creativity of an alien ally. The partnership had endured trials, survived chaos, and emerged stronger, leaving the promise of future escapades glimmering among the stars. The Artemis Vanguard sailed on, carrying two unlikely companions who had discovered that courage, ingenuity, and a little humor could forge alliances stronger than any armor, and perhaps even stronger than the distance between worlds. The galaxy was wide, dangerous, and full of surprises, but for Kieran and Lysera, it had suddenly become a little smaller, a little brighter, and infinitely more intriguing.